Welcome back to another episode of The Loco Fit Show, where we redefine what healthy means to you. I'm your host, Lauren Conlon, and this week I'm joined by our team mental health counselor, Rick, and we're going to be talking about the steps to behavior change. And so we're recording this, we're about a week and a half into the new year, and it was funny, I was thinking about this topic, and then you were thinking about this topic. Normally we like brainstorm together, but it just didn't happen this time. But I was like, I want to do one on this. And then you're like, hey, here's, print these notes. We're going to talk about that. I was like, oh my gosh, because this is so pertinent, and this really is like the root of everything, right? Mm-hmm. Because most people have goals, right? I would say that everybody listening to this podcast is interested in personal development and self-development, challenging themselves. And we always have really great intentions to want to change ourselves in some type of way. Mm-hmm. But oftentimes there is like a mismatch of our intentions and our vision to how to actually create that change. Mm-hmm. So we're going to go through kind of a step-by-step, I don't want to say a protocol, but kind of a framework to think about behavior change on a deeper level, and keep this general enough to where you can apply it to really any goal, whether that's physique or health or even, personal development related.
Yeah. And why I think this is a really relevant topic right now is not only do a lot of people call and have issues with this or inquire about what are some actionable steps. And I am going to give you guys actionable steps throughout the entire podcast. So if you're listening to this and you're like, what are some really good concrete things that I can do to create behavior change? Get your notebook out, write these things down, because there's about 7 or 8 steps that are really very crucial in this process. But it's obviously the new year. Everybody makes New Year's resolutions. And some of the people are finding a difficult time either really getting motivated to create the necessary momentum for change, or they've already failed. If you failed, don't worry. Welcome to the rest of the world.
Rick, we need to set the bar a little higher than that. Damn.
And let's just pick ourselves back up. Tomorrow's a new day.
Wallow in your pity. No, we're kidding. Don't do that.
Tomorrow's the 10th. It's all good. You didn't miss too much. And you can, really just get back up and figure out what it is. And I think there's the other part of this too, is that people start with an idea, a concept of what they want something to be, and they don't really have a great plan. And so all of a sudden it's like, where I am and where I want to be, there's not a clear-cut line for how to get there. And I think this gives a really good explanation. And this is not just about a behavior change in terms of there's something that I'm doing that I don't like. This is kind of can really be used in how I perceive problems, how problems exist in my life, and how I've been analyzing issues within my life, and what steps I can take to actually reframe my perspective, my outlook, and ultimately the goals that I use to achieve those things. So
this can be really used in almost any setting. And that's why I like the word framework, because now you can kind of view these things through this lens when you're making decisions. And because like you said, the biggest thing is people are making these plans, making these goals, but we're making goals that are so big, which is fine, but we're not having any of the steps before that end goal. We're starting at 0 and we want to go all the way to 100, and that's fine. But you need to have, okay, what's at step 5? What's at step 10? What's at 25? Okay, what happens if I go from 25 to 15 and then 17 and then back, right? There has to be a plan. And that's actually, if you guys listen to the podcast with me and Karina, we talked about goal setting. If you haven't listened to that, I would definitely go back and recommend we give some actionable steps just in general with goal setting, which is a totally different topic. But let's say you've picked the goal, you have the vision, you're trying to execute. Maybe you've already failed, maybe you haven't. The momentum is either strong or maybe it's kind of fizzling out. Here are the next steps in order to actually change your behaviors. So
number 1, I would ask you to describe what the problem behavior is first, right? You're trying to change something. Well, something exists in its place. So describe what that behavior is. Is it overeating? Is it overthinking? Is it yelling at your kids? Is it acts of violence or aggression? Is it overwhelming emotional outbursts? Dissociating, not coming in late, whatever it is, putting things off, procrastination, refusing to engage, whatever your issue is, what I want you to do is, number 1, be very specific and detailed. No vague terms here. Be pinpoint accurate with what the problem behavior is. Identify exactly what you've said, what you've thought, what you felt throughout that process. If feelings are kind of difficult for you, you can skip that step, but traditionally we're trying to change behavior because it causes negative consequences in our life. And so really what I want you to do is to start, this is kind of the therapeutic side of behavior change, really starting to explore what it is in that process that is creating emotional pain for you. Identify what you did not do instead, right? So the next step to that might be like describing the intensity of the behavior or the other characteristics that are involved in this. Like put it on a scale of 1 to 10. 10 being really intense and highly irrational or emotional or creating negative experiences and emotions with me, and 1 being 0. Like where on the scale is this problem behavior ranking?
Would you recommend doing this for like 1 at a time?
Yeah.
Or, okay.
Yeah. Like let's start with,
just start
let's
with
make
1.
it manageable.
Well, when you said like ranking them, so I wasn't sure if you meant ranking like all of the problems or just...
Did I say ranking?
Maybe you didn't. Maybe I just made that up.
I don't know. Did I? I don't know. Should we rewind?
Rewind. Okay. Edit.
Here we go. Editing.
Now, when you said overthinking, I was like, well, there's me. So now I'm really overthinking. Like, did I just make up
Shit,
something?
he's talking about me again. Damn it.
Okay, so 1 problem, be specific.
Be specific. Identify exactly what you did, what you said, what you thought, what you felt. Okay. The second step to that, or third step to that, would be describe the intensity of the overall behavior and the feelings and characteristics of that. That's an important step. You really want to understand where this is kind of ranking in terms of priority for you. Describe the problem, and this is a crucial step. Describe the problem in enough detail that a stranger would be able to accurately understand exactly what you're going through. The reason I say that is oftentimes we use these really vague terms, and I hear people say it all the time. Like, for example, you ask somebody how their day is going. Somebody's like, oh, I had a pretty good day. What does pretty good mean? Pretty good is such a vague term. It means something completely different to you than it does to me. And it's like, so I really want to get a good understanding of what you're talking about. And we're very vague with ourselves. Sometimes it'll be like, describe to me a goal. Well, I, want to lose weight. Okay. What does that actually mean? Do you want to lose weight but gain muscle? Do you want to lose weight for what specific reasons? Like, what is really underneath this? Like, we say a term like lose weight. I don't know what that actually means. Like, if I said to you, Lauren, I really want to be a happier person. Great.
Okay.
Like, what does that mean? What does it look like? Describe what that is so that we can see measurable results when we go to analyze this later.
That's the biggest thing, right? Like, is being able to measure from like point A to like down the line, a week, a month, 3 months, like being able to review. Because if you're not specific and you're very vague with yourself, then you kind of give yourself that like built-in like cop out, right? Because then you're like, well, I didn't really move too far, but like, it's okay, right? Like, I think when that's something that I've struggled with previously, is being specific with things, like so specific like that, and being really detailed, because you kind of like let yourself off that way. You know what I mean? You're like, right. Oh, well, if I'm not super detailed, then it's okay if it like doesn't happen, or I don't really have to commit to it, or whatever it is, changing something when it is more vague. So the more specific and detailed, the better, guys.
It becomes more concrete and a way for you to hold yourself accountable. And I think sometimes if it's an important enough change, that accountability is necessary in order to promote change. When it's something we're loosely doing or not really buying into, or perhaps doing for somebody else, it becomes more difficult to answer these questions. And so we really start to get a gauge of your motivation to really wanting to make this change. Something that you're doing for yourself or for other reasons, external reasons or whatever. So those are kind of like action step number 1 would be describe the problem in specific behavior, right? Be very specific, not vague. Identify what you did, what you felt, what you said. Describe the intensity of the behavior, and describe the behavior in enough detail that somebody who is a stranger would be able to understand exactly what you're going through. Number 2 for this, describe the specific prompting event, right? Like, when I say that, I mean, this started the behavior chain of events, so to speak, right? What is leading to the problem behavior? What is precipitating it, right? What is the prompting event, the triggering event, perhaps, if that's a better way to think about it? What's prompting you to make this change? What is antagonizing you? What is the issue at hand? Does that make sense?
This is the first thing I have clients reflect on whenever they're going through a problem. It's like, all right, like what, like let's say it is like overeating, right? Like just as an example, or they weren't able to hit whatever their food goals were. Okay, well, what prompted that? What was the trigger today? Was it because you didn't have food prepped? Was it because you didn't plan ahead? Was it because you skipped breakfast? Was it because you didn't sleep? Like those are all, that's the same problem, but they're all very different triggering events for people. And just saying, I could say, oh, well, you should have meal prepped. And then the person's like, well, I already did that. So do you not have an answer? It's like, no, but I don't know unless they're going to be able to reflect on that. So much of this is just a reflective process of what is that trigger.
Yeah, and let me read to you some of the things that I have written here. Always begin with some event in your environment, even if it doesn't seem to you that the environment caused the problem behavior. Otherwise, we could ask about any behavior, any thought or any feeling or that we experience. What prompted that? Possible questions to help you explore this area would be, what exact event precipitated the start of this chain reaction, right? When did the sequence of events that led to the problem behavior begin? When did the problem start? What was going on right before the thought of or the impulse for the problem behavior to occur? What were you thinking, feeling, or imagining at that time? And why did the problem behavior happen on that day instead of any other day before that? And I think that last one is kind of a crucial part, because I think what people forget is there was a time in your life when this problem didn't exist. And so let's go back to that time, and it kind of helps us understand what occurred to start to create this reaction. Oftentimes, what I find is problem behaviors develop out of a space where we don't know how to cope with what else was happening in our life. And so a bad habit, a ritual, something has started that now we recognize as problematic, but at one point probably developed out of some need or necessity. And I think going back and being like, what was happening in my life before this actually started? It's not the most important step, but it is a step that gives you additional insight and knowledge into it. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Yeah, okay. All right. So step number 3. This is the vulnerable factors. So everybody loves this. Describe the vulnerable factors happening before the prompting event. So what do I mean by this? What factors or events made you more vulnerable to reacting to the prompting event with this problem chain? Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Okay. So let me give you some things to kind of...
Yeah, clear it up a little bit, I guess, or some prompts to think about.
Okay, so some of the vulnerable factors. Was there physical illness? Unbalanced eating, sleeping, injury? Was there use of drugs? Misuse of prescription medications? Were there stressful events in your environment, either positive or negative, that affected you? Intense emotions, such as sadness, anger, fear, loneliness. Previous behaviors of your own that you found stressful that have been coming to your mind, right? Like sometimes just thinking about your past behaviors or reflecting on who you've been is enough to create stress within somebody. And so when I say the vulnerable factors, it's kind of exploring some of those secondary characteristics of the problem behavior. Does that add a little more clarity to it?
Yeah, okay. Absolutely. And that's always the hard part, right? Because this is like where you've had to be honest with yourself up until now, but now this is like, oh shit, just got real. I really can't hide anymore from this. I mean, you can, but then you're not going to really get to the root of this, right? It's the same way as like you could keep these things vague and not be very specific, but that's not going to help you in the long run. So actually doing this is going to be super crucial, even if it is, like maybe, I don't know, unsavory, right? Like you're like, wow, I probably shouldn't have done that or taken that or acted in this way or, these cascade of events. But if you don't take the time to actually reflect on that, how can you expect yourself to make a change? Because so once we already are ingrained in a habit or a behavior, like that's our default now. Like that's so much easier than actually changing it. So it's not enough to just be like, I want to do this. Like that's why when we say those things, it doesn't stick.
Yeah. And I think vulnerability is the space where we start feeling uncomfortable. And when people feel uncomfortable, they start to look for ways to avoid that. And so
would you say that this is the step maybe where people kind of like stop, or they're not maybe honest with themselves?
I mean, they can be not honest with themselves at any point throughout this process, but like I said, when and it's a framework to use in any aspect of your life. But when you're looking at really specific behavior changes, things that have been kind of perpetual, that you've done for years or that have really caused a significant problem that you're looking to really create. These are kind of necessary steps to take in order to fully understand it. Part of this is, remember I've described therapy as like 2 parts. There's the why something happens and then the what now. Well, this is really helping you understand why this problem behavior really existed and what it means to change it and the benefits and the ways that we can measure progress later. So for that step number 3, it's describe the factors happening before the event that made you feel vulnerable. That started down that chain of, behaviors that ultimately led to the problem behavior. Okay. So number 4, Describe in excruciating detail the chain of events that led to the problem behavior. This is everyone's favorite step.
These keep getting worse.
I told you guys there was going to be a lot of writing for this.
I was down with step 1 and 2, but now I'm like, I'm turning the podcast off.
Numbers are just dropping.
Yeah. Nobody finishes this episode.
If you made it to step 5, comment below.
Yeah.
That was kind of like, what was the other one we did, right? I didn't think anybody would, we were talking about shadow work, and I was like, there's probably like 4 people listening at this point, but it was like our highest rated episode.
Because it had like Carl Jung's name in it.
Yeah, there you go. It linked. So describing in detail the chain of events that led to the problem behavior. Imagine that your problem behavior is chained to the precipitating event in that environment. So how long is this chain? Where does it go? Where do the links, kind of occur? So actions are things that you do, right? Body sensations are feelings, cognitions, your beliefs, your expectations, your thoughts. Events in the environment or other things that you do. Sorry, it's a late night. And feelings and emotions that you experience. What exact thought or belief or feeling or action followed the prompting event, right? So you had the prompting event occur. What happened after that? What is the behavior that you display, essentially? Right? Okay. So that's essentially what this is describing, okay? So let's see, like
what would be an example?
Like, look at each link of the chain, okay? And after you write about it, was there another thought, another feeling, or another action that could have occurred in that space, right? And this is going to lead into like repair and like the actual change, developing new skills. What are we looking at changing, right? So having a clear understanding of the chain of events that not just led to the problem behavior, but what the problem behavior actually is. Okay. We should know that from step 1 too. Does that make sense? Okay. So could someone else have thought, felt, or acted differently at that point in time? Kind of an important question, right? Because sometimes when we're in our own minds, we don't see any other options other than what we've done. But if I'm like, hey, what would Lauren do? Right? I know what Lauren would do.
No, you're not asking that question. But
what would you do, Lauren? No, but you ideally want to, it helps you to find the different perspectives sometimes that you might be missing in yourself, to put yourself like, I think we all kind of carry voices and people in our heads. Like for me, like my mom is there, my uncles are there, my sister's there, my friend's father's there. There's various people and characteristics and, individuals throughout my life that have helped shape who I am or my thought processes on things. And so sometimes you take a step back and you're like, okay, I'm pissed about this, but what would my uncle say? What would my mother do in this moment? Or what would, my friend do who has like a business that I respect? Or what would this person do who's like my coach? It's like, can I challenge myself to think like another person and see a different perspective, even when, my own ego won't allow it, but perhaps by me focusing through a lens of another person, it helps me see my problems in a different light.
Yeah, because that's really just speaking to detachment. But sometimes, like you said, that can be really hard when it's just like for ourselves, but maybe pairing it with that like thought of another person could be really useful for you to like, because everybody's like, oh yeah, of course I can detach, and then you're in the midst of it and you're like, fuck, I can't detach for shit, like like this is so hard. That's why it's one of the hardest things. But I really like that idea of, and like you said, it could be someone who is really influential in your life, or it could be someone who not that you're trying to emulate, I guess is a good way, or how would this person respond? And even if you don't know, right? Like it's the idea of like, okay, this person runs their business in a way that is ethical, that I appreciate. What do I think that they would do in this situation? And maybe you do know them, but maybe you don't. But having that as a framework, I think could be nice. And instead of, like you said, wanting to detach, but like your own ego is like, no, like we can't see past that right now. And maybe you can in like an hour or 2 days, but sometimes you need to make that decision like right now, and that needs to be a little bit quicker.
Yeah, and it can be people that you respect, but I usually try and make references to, are there people in your life that that you have interaction with that you can really hear their voice in their head? Like I love Tony Robbins, but I don't know Tony Robbins. I haven't had like one-on-one conversations with him.
I thought you had.
No.
You fucking lied. The first time we hung out, I'm just kidding. I know Tony Robbins.
We're friends on Facebook.
I mean, I liked his page. Yeah.
But I don't have any real dialogue. Now, there's 1,000 videos that you can watch on Tony Robbins,
Yeah.
but like my Uncle Joe or my Uncle Tom, these are two people that are very influential in my life. And, I would sit back and say, well, what would they think? What would they do? And so it allows you a different perspective. And some of this stuff isn't just about like changing our diet or our physique. Some of this is about changing elements of who we are or how we react to people or how we perceive situations or events. And I think sometimes that's a really, really understated aspect. An individual's perception of events shapes what they think about it. And two people can watch something or experience something and be moved in two completely different directions. Why is that? It's based off their perception and what they're willing to take from it. And so this is a little bit larger sometimes than just, simple behavior changes that you're looking for. This is a change in mindset. This is a change in perspective, in attitude, in value, in the way that you see yourself. And so utilizing all of these skills, and we're kind of running through them, and some of this shit would take me sessions to get through with people.
This is not like, you go through this checklist and all of a sudden now like you're good to go. Like this is going to be a process. We're just laying it out. But then the real work is going to start when you're actually dissecting all this. And step 1 might be easy, but step 3 might take you a few months, right? Because it's not like you just have this, all of a sudden you meditate or journal, one time and you have this deep understanding of everything. Like this is going to take time, but we did of course want to be thorough and share all of it. But that's okay.
And this is a tool that I will use and go back to. Somebody will come in and they'll describe this and we'll say, okay, fine, we're going to lay this all out. And I'm going to give them worksheets to do and we're going to kind of work through it. And then, we might get another couple of weeks down the road and they're like, it happened again. And I'll be like, let's pull it out. Let's go through the process again. And you go through it and you go through it and you go through it. This isn't like a magic pill. This is just to do the work. And to commit to make mistakes to err is human, but I'm going to continue to grow and learn from this process. What's part of the step are you messing up? Where are you having difficulty? I was going to say fucking up. I don't know. I didn't.
Did you forget where you were?
Forgot who I was talking to for a second.
But what you said was really great about this. Like this being the underlying thing for everything, because your perception of events or how you react is what will determine any kind of change for any goal that you've set, whether it's like physique, performance, recovery, health, financial, literally any goal that you've set is not going to change until you get to the root of those issues with how you're perceiving situations for yourself, for other people, how you're reacting. Like that is everything. If we can actually change that, then we can decide to make whatever change that you want, to your body and the rest of your life. Like that is, I don't want to say it's secondary, but like it's why people don't make sustained long-term change, because they're only following something for, a certain amount of time and they're doing it more on a surface level, which I'm not knocking because everybody has to go through different levels, right? Like you're not going to expect somebody like day one to get all into this and to fully understand it, because it's always changing as well. So I'm not saying that it's a bad idea to just start something. You should. But this is kind of what is going to happen as you progress in your journey. And this same issue could also change over time, right? So like you're saying, you can go through this with a client and then they're like, oh, this happened again. There's so many times with clients where they check in and it's the same problem, but it looks a little bit different now. So maybe they've gotten past level 1 or level 2, but now the same kind of problem is recurring, but it just looks a little bit different. And it might even feel a little bit different, but it's still the same thing when we peel it back. Yeah. So this is one of those things that it's okay that it might happen again, but are we continuously revisiting this and making changes?
Yes.
And then chances are, hey, you probably don't just got one problem, you probably got a lot. So once you get one down, we can start going down that list, the rank order list that I made up. But
okay. So as we move on, and just before we move on, like you can apply this toward relationships in your life and feel like, okay, for a year or whatever, I've been working on this and I finally have a good handle on it. I'm seeing things differently. And then you may discover like, oh, there's something happening at work or in my social life. And it's like, I can apply this to there now. And so the idea of it is not just that it promotes instant change. It's kind of a structure to adopt for life, and really kind of managing those things. So this next step 5, is kind of an inevitable step, right? Describe the consequences of the problem behavior. What problems have occurred in your life as a result of these issues. How did other people react immediately to the problem, and how did they react later to the problem that you displayed? How did you feel immediately following the behavior that you displayed? What effect did the behavior have on you, on your environment, on your relationships? So this is an important aspect, and it's one where sometimes people can kind of get riddled with shame, feel bad, feel depressed, because it's like, okay, it's kind of easy to identify what the problem is because I can be a little bit removed from that. When I'm describing the consequences of my behavior, this also encompasses taking responsibility. And one of the most difficult things to do is accept responsibility to somebody else, right? It's one thing for me to quietly whisper under my breath, I fucked up, or that wasn't good, or I made an ass of myself, or whatever. It's another thing to be sitting in front of somebody that you have hurt, or talking to them on the phone or whatever it is, and hearing the pain of your choices and your decisions, and then feeling that and taking responsibility and saying, okay, I'm hearing what you're saying and I fucked up, and it's clear that I hurt you, and describe what that hurt is. So recognizing the consequences of your behavior will go a long way in reminding you, like, that moment when you might be angry or bitter or feeling something, right? And you feel totally justified in your anger. And if you can remember, like, oh, when I do this, it creates this, and this over here, these consequences are far more powerful than what I'm feeling right now. And so shut the fuck up, give myself a minute to take a step back and breathe and self-regulate myself, calm down a little bit, and respond later, right? Sometimes that's the behavior change that we need to implement, which is no behavior, right?
Yeah, that's really where detaching is super important, especially if it is that kind of like I don't know how to describe that type of a negative emotion, but like there seems to be a different signature to something like feeling like down versus feeling really angry, right? Like there's just a different signature to how that feels. So I would say that that's going to be really important for those type of like elevated negative emotions. We'll just call them that, is to really be able to, okay, like how can I take a step back? Like, and we all kind of have that visceral feeling when we're getting to that place. So I would say that probably like, would you suggest like reflecting on those kind of bodily cues? I think you mentioned it in one of the steps, like kind of how you're physically feeling. Cause I think for a lot of people, there is like a feeling that you get beforehand when you're going to engage in those negative things. So like anytime that I'm really angry, like, or really upset, like there's a very specific visceral feeling that I get, right? When people have struggled with overeating before, there's oftentimes this certain agitation that you get. And it's kind of hard to explain if you've never felt it, but there's a very specific type of agitation, that you'll feel. So it's like being able to identify, oh, okay, like I'm on that border of like, this could go sideways really quickly. Let me go do something else now. Let me remove myself from the situation. Let me go get out this energy, whatever this is, this agitation, and like this kind of a easy, light activity. So there's just certain things that I think if we can tie that to our physiology as well, that can help us, because sometimes when we're emotionally like very elevated in a negative sense, it's going to be hard sometimes to like rationalize with yourself. So if you can tie that to a physiological sensation, that would probably be really useful, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. The mind and the body are connected. And so sometimes people aren't aware of what they're thinking or what they're feeling emotionally, but they're painfully aware of what they're feeling in their body. That queasiness, the tension in their shoulders, the clenching, like the jaws tightening, whatever
like
it is. And so even in people who are experiencing panic, like sometimes they're unaware of the thoughts that they're having, but they're very aware of like the nervousness that's circulating throughout their body and their energy. And I say whichever one comes first. If you recognize, oh, my thoughts are creating this, fine. And you recognizing your thoughts and your emotions. For some people, until they create more awareness with it, they just respond to what they're feeling. And they don't know why they're feeling it, but they know that like, oh, like I carry tension like right here in the back of my traps or right in my head. And it's like, I know when I feel energy in those spaces, I'm like, I'm really tense or I'm either really angry about something. And so being aware of physiologically what's happening in your body can be a really big cue. So yeah, the mind and the body are connected, which is why we always stress, like from a mental health perspective, people are like, I'm depressed and I'm anxious. And the first things I start to run down are like, what's your diet look like? Are you exercising? Are you getting fresh air? Are you getting these things? And people are like, well, that's not really mental health. I'm like, it's absolutely mental health.
You're not
I'm not asking you to become the Mr. Olympia here. No. I'm just saying get off the couch and go for a walk, right?
Yeah, the fact that that's not more discussed, that's a whole different tangent. But
yeah.
We'll save that for another day.
All right. So step number 5 was describing the consequences of your behavior. So step 6, this is where we're going to get to actually start to change the behavior, which is describe the skillful behaviors to replace the problem links in that event chain, right? So what does that actually look like? All right. Describe in detail at each point where you could have used a new skillful behavior to head off the problem behavior, right? So this weekend came and went. I was an obnoxious asshole. I did all these things, right? Now I'm Monday morning quarterbacking this thing. I'm getting out my journal. I'm writing things down, and I'm recognizing the sequence of events. Where could I have interrupted it? Like, this is similar to what we would do with our, we call them different things, but like behavior chain analysis with some of the inmates, is we would say, all right, what were the thoughts you were, what were the situational factors that occurred, right? What were the triggering events? What was the negative self-talk? What was this? And then one of the things that we go backwards and we say, okay, over here was the problem behavior. You could have intervened here, 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 and here, right? Yes. What were the skills you needed to intervene here? What were the skills you needed to intervene here? What were the skills? And so you look at it and you say, all right, where am I lacking? So this is where I exploded, right? So I'm going to go all the way back to the beginning and say, I could have intervened at any one of these spaces. What was missing from my repertoire of tools or skills that doesn't exist that I need to start to create? And this is the work, right? It's easy to do, not easy, but all the other shit can be done. This is the part that requires effort, change, and commitment. And so when you start doing that, this is where kind of rubber meets the road. Mm-hmm. You know, this is where it can really start to get uncomfortable to be in a situation where you're feeling something and then try and react in a completely different way and not know what the results are going to be.
Yeah, but that is everything, because like you said, there is oftentimes when we're in the midst of this, we feel like, oh, it just went from, you know, I felt this emotion to all of a sudden, like now it's like level 10, mm-hmm. right? But really, like you said, there was 4 or 5 steps before that.
Right.
Like, what could we have done before? And not even before that, like, not even just from the triggering event here, like even before that, right? Like, mm-hmm. if you know, okay, me being consistent with like my training and my eating and, you know, doing some kind of self-reflective practice, if I do those things, like, and I get outside and I go for like all that, you know, the kind of healthy habits that we talk about, if I do these things, like that's even way before like the triggering event, right? Mm-hmm. But that's just as important too. Like, there's so many steps that we can work on, and it's okay. Everybody is going to be different with what is going to set them off. But we need to figure out those skills. And then also, like, what are the daily actionable things you can mm-hmm. do that keep you regulated from like a nervous system level? Yeah.
And it's just kind of like starting to recognize where in that process I can be accountable to myself and can do different things. You know, like in Jiu Jitsu, we talk about we have early defenses and we have late defenses. For those of you that don't do Jiu Jitsu, sorry, it's the only great analogies I really have. But when somebody has your arm completely extended, right, and the limb is about to break, people will ask, what do I do to get out of this?
You shouldn't have gotten in that position.
Well,
thanks, coach.
It's
I know.
But at this point, there isn't really much we can describe other than luck, right?
Yeah.
However, there was like a sequence of 4 or 5 things that happened before that where it was like, oh, mm-hmm. they were starting to shift their hips, address it this way. Well, the hips got in this place. Now what? Well, now my arm is being extended. We'll create more posture by doing, you know what I mean? And so there's this series of steps that you can take all along there to prevent your arm being broken. And so that's kind of what we're starting to get people to recognize is what skills are you missing and how do we start to develop them and implement them? And don't always wait till it gets catastrophic, right? We don't want to wait till the limb is like about to snap before we start to defend it.
Man, jiu-jitsu is really such a great analogy for this, and I really wish people would.
I know,
right? It's so good because there's so many.
It's such a like I feel like I could go on with really describing it, but you like visual and the ability to feel it.
Yeah.
So for any of you that do jiu-jitsu out there,
like you totally get it.
You get it.
But if you don't, if you know, you know. But if not, sorry. I guess go watch a YouTube video. Just kidding. Don't do that. It's very confusing and very weird. Yeah. So to give just a little bit more insight into this, like
Go back to the chain of events following the prompting event. Circle each link where you could have done something different and where by doing something different, you would have avoided that problem behavior. Okay. What could you have done differently at each link in this chain to avoid the problem behavior? And what coping behaviors or skills or skillful behaviors could you have used to create a different outcome for yourself? Okay. What is the desired outcome too? Have a good understanding of that. That should be pretty specific, like maybe not hurt my loved ones. Like that's a good goal. It doesn't have to be that you create something amazing. It can just be the absence of pain.
It's a pretty good goal.
Again, if I was going to use Jiu Jitsu, sometimes it's not about tapping somebody out. It's about preventing yourself from being tapped out. Right. And so the ability to measure your goals and your success is going to be very different. So step number 7 in this process is develop prevention plans to reduce vulnerability of stressful events. And I think this goes to very well what you were just speaking about, right? I think I remember reading a quote from Jim Carrey. We were talking about this a few weeks ago, you and I, and it was, I think Jim Carrey, the actor, if he still acts, I don't know, whatever. He said something like, look, if you're not going to bed on time, getting 8 hours of sleep, exercising, eating right, and reading and talking to people, you're not even giving yourself a chance to cope with life. So there's basic fundamental things that we can do. And so when I start to recognize like people, places, situations, experiences that trigger me, it's my responsibility to start to change around those things. If I know I can't be in a bar because it's going to lead to me drinking, then I don't go to bars. And yeah, it's a major life change, and everybody else, most of the people in the world can go to a bar and not have a problem, but that ain't me, or that's not you. Mm-hmm. Or if it's going down a particular alley, or if it's going to a particular gym, or if it's doing certain things or certain events or being around people, you can lie to yourself all you want, but the problems are still going to exist. And so to start to recognize that and to create prevention strategies, right? Like an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. Like prevent the problem from even occurring, and you don't have to worry about dealing with it later. Mm-hmm. And so
that's really what we do. You know, like once we've figured out, okay, what are some of these things? Then it's like, what can we put into place in terms of like your daily strategies and behaviors, and your mindset as well. But what are the fundamental things? Like nobody can expect to eat well if they're not preparing food. Mm-hmm. Like, I'm sorry, but food has to get into your fridge and it has to be cooked. Obviously, there's different ways you can navigate this. You can get a meal prep service. I'm aware there's a lot of different great options. Shout out to Icon Meals for a really great meal prep service. But, you guys understand what I'm saying. Like there has to be food there, quality food there if you want to follow a quality diet. Mm-hmm. You can't just expect to eat on the fly at all times. Like it's just, you can sometimes, right? Just like with the gym, like we can have these great intentions. Like I want to go to the gym. I have a membership. I got these new clothes. I have these goals. I have this program. You might even have a program, mm-hmm. but like, when are we going? What days? What times? Are you packing your gym clothes? Or are you going to say, no, I'll just go home? And no, you're not. Mm-hmm. Don't lie to yourself. Like, that when you go home, you're going to sit down and then you're going to start doing some stuff around the house. You're going to, just pack your clothes and go do it after, or do it before. Like, right. There's all these different things that can prevent you from not doing the behavior. And
to take that even a step further, if your plan is to go to the gym in the morning, what are you doing the day before to prepare for that? Yep. Are you going to bed on time? Yep. Are you on your phone? Like all of those things, mm-hmm. right? And so it kind of becomes this endless loop of behaviors, right? And creating healthy habits. Mm-hmm. And habits are just nothing more than routines and decisions that we've made over and over again that produce the same results. And so, learning to create a winning mindset or a positive mindset, where you expect to win is, winning isn't a sometimes thing. It's an all the time thing. That's like an old Vince Lombardi quote, and he also says, but unfortunately, so is losing. And so you either create a mindset where this is going to keep repeating, or whether it's one time you experience pain or 1,000 times you experience pain, it's kind of up to you. And I've had a few experiences, even recently in my life, where I experienced a very significant pain, and I was like, ooh, I'm never repeating that. Like, I'm learning from this. And you start to dissect it, and I've done this work for myself and said, okay, What am I going to put in its place if this were to ever happen again, to prevent it from being there? And that's really my strategy. Is I'm like, okay, I don't want to do this again, so I'm going to prevent it. Right? I don't want to have the skills to manage it.
I don't need 5 of these situations or 30.
No. I'm going to go through one because you can reflect on it and say it was painful for me, but I realized it was also painful for somebody else. And so I don't want to recreate that in any circumstance. So you look at these kind of prevention strategies as a tool to prevent future harm. And then really the last step is repair. And describe what you're going to do to repair important or the significant consequences of that behavior, right? And this is kind of a fundamental step. So analyze. Who or what did you harm in this process? What was the negative consequences that you can repair? Can you make amends? Can you atone for what you did? Sometimes it's as simple as paying money. Other times it might be as simple as doing a favor or an act of kindness. Other times it might be apologizing and taking responsibility for what you did and just standing in front of that person. Look to the harm or the distress that you've actually caused other people. And, can you repair, or what damage can you repair in that relationship, and start to do it? If the person will allow you to do it, do it. And then, it's not just, this isn't I'm sorry. And then, we've talked about the words I'm sorry being nothing more than manipulation sometimes. I'm sorry followed by action is sincere. I'm sorry followed by change in behavior is sincere. And so you start to really explore the damage that you've created and repair it to the best of your ability, however that is. And sometimes people are like, well, I don't know how to repair it. Ask the other person.
Yeah.
What
That's
do you
how you're
need
going to find out, through communication.
Yeah. Sometimes it's as simple as, listening to what they say and then doing what they're asking, if you can.
Yeah, and sometimes you can't, but at least you are going through the effort to try that. Obviously, it's on them if they want to kind of work that out in whatever capacity that looks like. But at least you are saying, okay, like, I did my best here, and then you just try to move forward from that way.
Yeah.
And if this is for you, just your own thing, maybe somebody else isn't harmed, this is still towards yourself as well. Like, that's still very relevant. Because I think what happens when we try to go through behavior change, obviously most people, unless they're just completely, aloof to what they're doing to themselves, most people have some type of reflection of like, maybe I shouldn't do this, but they keep doing it. Mm-hmm. They're like, why am I like this? Right? Mm-hmm. Like, why do I keep finding myself here? But when you've gone through these steps, like, you have to repair that relationship with yourself as well, to be like, hey, like, you've done the work to like not be like this anymore. Mm-hmm. And maybe you'll slip up every once in a while, but like, you don't have to think of yourself in this negative way that like, oh, well, when this happens, I'm always going to respond that way. Because if that's your mindset, then you're really never going to make any change. Right. So you also have to repair this within yourself if it is kind of like a self-to-self, situation, because I think that that's where so many people get trapped and they label themselves as like, I am this, or like, I'm whatever, right?
Yeah.
And
I'm a hothead, right?
Yeah.
Oh, now you're always going to respond and aggressive.
You literally are creating that, like, you're living that out. Yeah. And we're all guilty of it, you know what I mean? Like, we all do that with ourselves. So I think that going through this checklist, or this framework, whatever we want to call this, is really, really useful. But then also, like you said, to kind of round that out, like, hey, you need to stop thinking of yourself as this individual. Like, maybe this is how you act, maybe this is how you feel sometimes, but if you're actively taking those steps to not be that person, then you shouldn't label yourself that way, because that is the surest way to stay there. Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. So hopefully these steps kind of helped. Again, just a quick brief run through with them. Describe the problem behavior. What was the prompting event? Go through the vulnerable factors. What was the chain of events, the consequences of that behavior? What new skills or behaviors do you need to start to adapt? What prevention plans can you put in place? And how can you repair the relationships or the damage that was caused? And so a lot of information in this one to kind of like go back and probably write some stuff down if you need it. But hopefully this was beneficial for some of you guys listening.
Yeah, this, like we said, this is kind of the crux of everything. And this is by no means to say, like, listen to this and all of a sudden, like, you write this once and it's like you're good to go. This is going to be something that is going to take time and reflection and potentially professional help or just some kind of guidance, whether it is a therapist or it is a coach or it's even a friend, if you really want to be vulnerable and say, hey, listen, like, not everything requires, like therapy intervention, right?
Correct.
Like 100%. Certainly there's a lot of things that do, but not everything. So it could be something that's small, but it really does either bother bother you or kind of hinder your life in some way, and be open with a friend or family member and be like, listen, can you help hold me accountable to this? Like, and sometimes that can be embarrassing, but it's like, listen, we all need that. So whether it's a therapist, coach, or a friend or family member, get some accountability to these things, and then you're going to be able to expedite this process. But if you are interested in therapy, we will put Rick's contact information below, but say your email for everybody out loud if you remember it.
FullCircleTherapyFL@gmail.com.
And if you guys are interested in one-on-one coaching, you can visit teamlogofit.com for more information and also other resources that we have. And if you're interested in our app, which has meal plans, macros, training programs, and mental health resources, you can visit redefinehealthyapp.com. Thank you guys so much for listening. If you enjoyed the show, please share it. We hope you got a lot of notes out of this, and we'll talk to you guys next week.